Welcome back, everybody. It's Tuesday, July 23rd, 2024. Born on this date in 1928, musician Bill Lee of Snow Hill. We don't get to call out Snow Hill too often. It's in Wilcox County. Don't go there looking for snow. Bill Lee was a jazz bassist and composed film scores such as the one for Do the Right Thing. Born in 1943 on this date, nuclear freeze advocate Dr. Randall Caroline Forsberg of Huntsville. In 1982, former University of Alabama and NBA player Gerald Wallace of Childersburg. Today we'll talk about possible state intervention in police departments and one school district. We also have Democrats lining up behind the Veep. And host of the podcast Beat Everyone, Ben Flanagan, is back on the show. My name's Ike Morgan, and we're down in Alabama. Well, could the state's guidance help local law enforcement agencies that are having a hard time hiring and keeping officers? Some state lawmakers think so, reports AL.com's Mike Kaysen. Two Republicans have pre-filed a bill in both the Senate and House of Representatives that would allow the Alabama governor or attorney general to appoint an interim police chief for a city. The bill has a requirement that a police force be 30% or more below its 10-year average. Theoretically, at that point, the state could appoint an interim who wouldn't be constrained by politics. State Senator Will Barfoot said he doesn't know enough about local circumstances at this moment to say that an appointment needs to be made in places such as Montgomery or Birmingham, but that he'd like to give the state that tool if needed. State Representative Reed Ingram believes putting inspirational leaders in place could very well benefit those cities. Quote, I think that the mayor of Birmingham is a good person. I think that the mayor of Montgomery is a good person, but a lot of times a good person doesn't mean that they're going to be set to lead in a lot of areas, in every area. The Alabama League of Municipalities and at least one governor have already said the bill would undermine local authority. The 2025 legislative session begins in February. Bessemer City School Board members voted to allow the state to take it over this school year, reports AL.com's Rebecca Griesbach. After the district's latest audit, State Superintendent Eric Mackey sent a letter to board members warning them about the system's financial and governance problems. Last week, the school board met with state officials, and Mackey recommended the state intervene. That was last week. Yesterday, the Bessemer School Board unanimously embraced that recommendation. Board President Lee Jones said they wanted to send the message that they want to become more effective, and board members are describing the intervention as a partnership. The state school board still needs to approve the plan before it goes into effect. According to Congresswoman Terry Sewell, Alabama's Democratic National Convention delegates have voted unanimously in favor of the endorsement of Vice President Kamala Harris as the Democratic nominee for president. Sewell is also the chair of that delegation. And according to the Associated Press, Harris already has support from enough delegates nationwide to win her the nomination. Although I wouldn't bet my truck on anything going according to plan during this election. Now, in addition to the delegates, the Alabama Democratic Party is also backing Harris, according to State Party Chair Randy Kelly. Well, we're going to take a really quick break. Be right back to talk Alabama football, Eli Gold, and more with Ben Flanagan. Thanks, everybody, for sticking around. We would like to welcome back Ben Flanagan to the show. He's been on here to talk about a variety of things. He's aced a Friday quiz. He's been all over my Spotify commercials, by the way. Congratulations on that, Ben, because Spotify knows that I'll be interested in a podcast he's putting out. And which actually been I was able to get a little bit out of him last time he was here. Tell us about Beat Everyone.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ike. I think so. This is Beat Everyone. It's an Alabama football podcast, and I think that this is a show that is going to be essential listening for all Alabama fans, which is a really broad spectrum of people. I mean, when you talk about sports fans, there's not just one type of person that you picture inside of your head. I mean, it's humanity. It's like every type of person that you can imagine. And that's also true for Alabama football fans. And, you know, at AL.com, I and we have all been covering fan culture for so long that we've really gotten to know that sect of this state and our state. And it's just a really interesting blend of people who adore this thing that is Alabama football. And the idea behind this podcast is that we're going to talk about what people care about the most, and we're going to tell the story of the Crimson Tide as they embark on what we hope is going to be a new golden era under new head coach Kalen DeBoer. And we're going to do that in so many really fun ways. And, you know, one part of that is we're going to have on some of the best and brightest minds in sports media, along with legendary former Alabama football players. Like, we've already talked to people like John Parker Wilson, the former Alabama quarterback. We've talked to one of the great linebackers of the Saban era, Rashaan Evans, and what will be amazing episodes. I've already had these conversations, and they tell stories that Alabama fans have never heard before about Nick Saban, about practice, about what happened behind the scenes, what they remember about great games, their national championship runs. And, you know, the show's also going to look into Alabama's incredible past, which is just so rich in tradition, championship tradition. And that's thanks to people like Nick Saban and Bear Bryant and others who made the program the best in college football history. And listen, as a lifelong Tuscaloosa resident and as somebody that has covered this program closely for most of my professional life, I truly believe that if you love Alabama, then you won't want to miss a single episode. Like, the plan and the hope here is to deliver Alabama fans the best Alabama football podcast of all time.
Yeah, you said something really interesting early on about just the broad spectrum of people who are interested in Alabama football or college football. And I've always thought the reason football eclipsed baseball being my favorite sport, but I totally get it because you can follow it on so many levels, right? You can understand swing routes and post patterns, or you can understand, hey, we're crimson and white, we're going that way, and follow. And
Yeah.
then there's so much culture around the college game that uh, to me, I didn't grow up Crimson Tide fan. I want to listen to this thing because I love college football culture. I love campus culture, and throughout the SEC, throughout the South, and of course, you know, Alabama's high and mighty as anyone. Bringing in those names, man, this is going to be killer. You bringing in those big names. People love to identify with former players, whether they went on to great NFL careers or they just had that one moment in the sun. Another voice, you know, now we've talked about now, and it's been on your some of your ad spots. What was it like to work with the voice, Eli Gold?
Man, so we're going to have new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday, right? And Tuesday is going to be the thing that I just sort of described, where we're talking about Alabama football, the story, the active season. We're going to be talking about DeBoer and Saban, talking to players and people in the media. But on Thursdays, we're going to have something really special. And like you said, we're going to be talking to Eli Gold. And, you know, as somebody who has followed Alabama football my entire life, I never thought that I'd have the opportunity to work with Eli Gold, who I personally believe is a legend in his profession.
No
I'm
question.
not alone there.
No question.
Certainly among the greatest to ever speak into a microphone, and not just because it's for a team that's in our state, I mean, this is such a cool opportunity, not only for me and us, the team that is making Beat Everyone happen, but really for fans who are going to hear the longtime voice of the Crimson Tide as they've never heard him before. And Eli tells amazing stories about his time in the booth at Alabama. We talk about his iconic calls in classic Alabama games. Like, we get stories about historic figures like Nick Saban and Gene Stallings and Kenny Stabler and so many others. And one thing I'll guarantee you is that you won't hear a better impersonation of the Snake, Kenny Stabler, than the one that Eli does on this podcast. He caught us all off guard with that one. So tune in for it. But Eli had the best seat in the house and was in the room for some of the greatest moments in Alabama history. So fans won't want to miss what he has to say about it all. It's really special.
Yeah, and again, college football culture and sports culture, Eli Gold is an iconic voice for longtime NASCAR fans. I mean, he, just, as a NASCAR fan, wipe college football away. If I've never seen a ball game, just listening to MRN and on some of the networks, if I was going through podcasts and heard Eli Gold's voice, I would hang on for a minute. So legend, yes. I have a really inappropriate Eli Gold story, because the only time I met him was at a function, and I ran into him in the men's room. But it was a media function, and
Go on.
and I felt like somebody. I've met some other ball coaches and all, but I ran into Eli Gold in the men's room. That's big time. I had made it.
Eli's the man. I mean, when you're in the room with him, you've listened to him for decades and decades of your life, but when you're in the room with him and you hear that voice come out, even if you're just in conversation with him, it doesn't change one bit. It's not a bit. That's how Eli Gold sounds. He can make anything sound electric and just iconic and amazing and historic. I mean, he was blessed with those pipes, man, and he took advantage of it for an illustrious career at Alabama that spanned 4 decades. And you're right. I mean, he's the voice of NASCAR for so many people. He was a hockey commentator for a while. I mean, he's called baseball. He's called basketball for Alabama. I mean, this guy's just really done it all. He's an encyclopedia of broadcasting history. He's super well connected and has a lot of friends out there. And he's a mentor to so many people and a hero to so many people. And I think for a lot of us who work in media, Eli, especially in Alabama and me, where I've grown up in Tuscaloosa, Eli holds a really special place in a lot of our hearts and minds when it comes to our own aspirations in media and living up to a similar standard that Eli has created, not only for himself, but other people who are pursuing similar career paths. But I'm telling you, I mean, Alabama fans are really in for a treat because, again, Eli, he was there for Bill Curry, and he was there for Gene Stallings and Dennis Franchione and Mike Dubose and the Mike Price saga. And then obviously when Shula came in, the end of his run, and he was the voice of Alabama for the entirety of the Nick Saban era, the next golden era in Alabama football history. Eli was there for the entire thing. And so he has seen everything up close and personal. And like I said, he's been in the room for a lot of this. He has had relationships with these coaches. He's been to practices. And so other than him just calling the games that we've all seen and talking about the amazing calls, Eli he goes in depth about what was happening behind the scenes at Alabama during those 4 decades that made him the legend that he is today. And on top of that, Ike, we all know that Eli is no longer with Alabama and had a pretty public split with Alabama. And Eli tells his side of the story there too. We go in depth to learn a little bit more from Eli's perspective about what went down in terms of his exit from Alabama. But for me, and we go into great detail about that and have a great conversation with him that's really positive, and I think is going to make a lot of Alabama fans feel better about Eli and where he is now, and really going to look forward to what he has in store for the rest of his career.
Your resume is kind of being built up here as well, by the way. So you talk about Eli's been a lot of places. I mean, you've hosted podcasts, one stories from the pandemic. I think you called it Outbreak Alabama. Dozens of personal stories inside what was going on in people's lives during a rough time. And you also did a podcast called Bammers, which was about culture surrounding Crimson Tide football and in Tuscaloosa. So this is, you're not exactly a rookie coming to this thing either.
Yeah, no, not at all. I mean, this is a format that I love and I'm really comfortable with. But more than anything, it's about what we're exploring. And Alabama fan culture is something that has fascinated me most of my life. And anytime I learn more about it, it just makes me want to go even deeper into understanding the people who are obsessed with Alabama football and really Alabama sports for that matter. I mean, it is so ingrained in the culture and identity of not only Tuscaloosa, but an entire fan base that spans the entire world. We're not talking about even Alabama. Alabama football at this point is a global brand that has tremendous reach. We find fans in Israel and Rome and Russia and other parts of the world where Alabama has reached like no other sports brand in the world, in my opinion. And the way people connect on Alabama football is amazing. It creates this really unique sense of unity on game days, or if you do run into somebody out there in the wild and in the rest of the world who love Alabama football, it's just something that you can instantly bond over. And it's so interesting on Saturdays when you see people from all walks of life hugging, high-fiving, sharing meals, screaming Roll Tide at each other, shaking their shakers in Bryant-Denny Stadium, being one of 100,000 plus in one of the most electrifying environments in all of college football and really all of sports, in my opinion. And so it's just what makes Alabama football so special. And we haven't even cracked the winning aspect of it. The fact that Alabama is a championship program that for the last however many years now, 100 years, has been at the top of the heap in terms of being a dominant program. They've had one dynasty after the other. One just ended in terms of Saban's career coming to an end as at least the Alabama head coach. But we know now that Saban was not an anomaly, right? Bear Bryant came before him. Frank Thomas came before him. Gene Stallings came in between. And something tells me that Kalen DeBoer, a guy who has had success wherever he's been as a head football coach, is probably going to have similar success at Alabama now that he has the type of resources he does in Tuscaloosa. So it's just, it never gets boring here when it comes to Alabama football. And, the football on the field is what obviously makes it so special. But on the other side of that coin, the fans in the stands and the fans tailgating, the fans watching at home, again, all over the state, nation, and world, they are what make Alabama football. And that is who we're trying to make this podcast for. And I think they're going to love it.
Well, yeah, we'll see about that going forward. I know Auburn fans are licking their chops right now, hoping for a 180 in this thing. Hey, you have your first episode dropping today. Can you give us a little hint of what we might see?
Yeah, we're going to talk about culture change in Tuscaloosa. We're going to have Michael Casagrande, the longtime AL.com Alabama football reporter and columnist. And we're also going to have our good friend, Matt Scalici, who is a producer on the podcast. And we're going to talk about the differences between Nick Saban's culture as the head coach at Alabama and also Kalen DeBoer and how things have changed in Tuscaloosa and in that football facility and what we might see on the field that might be a little different compared to how Nick Saban ran it for 17 straight incredible years as Alabama's head coach. And then later in the episode, we're going to talk to John Parker Wilson, the first starting quarterback of the Nick Saban era, a guy who is a big part of ushering in the Saban dynasty, as it were, somebody who led Alabama to an undefeated regular season, an SEC Western Division title, faced Tim Tebow down in the SEC championship with the chance to play for a national championship had they won that game. John Parker Wilson is somebody who speaks super, like he's just a really good ambassador in terms of understanding Alabama football, especially being such a vital part of ushering in the Saban era and also speaking about the era before that, the end of the Mike Shula era, as a guy who played for both of those coaches and can talk about a major transition. When you have a coaching change and a culture change, you obviously have a different style and a different product that you see on the field. And John Parker Wilson happened to be right there under center for both of those. So who better to talk about a culture change than the guy who lived it?
Yeah, where do the time go? By the way, with John Parker Wilson doesn't seem forever ago, but boy, I guess he was kind of. Hey, let me ask you about culture change. Speaking of, um, of course, the programs evolve. Uh, Alabama has a long, long reputation, and Auburn a little bit the same way, particularly when it comes to Alabama and the Iron Bowl. But Alabama has its reputation. What has changed, do you think, between, say, 1989, or at least when Gene Stallings came aboard, and now? I was told a story, an Alabama fan, the biggest Alabama fan I knew growing up, his dad was just monster fan. And there's a story about him going quail hunting during a football game and listening on the radio, you know. Um, I don't know what that did for the quail, but hey, I'm just going with the story. But he actually took his Alabama hat off and shot it. So that's the. Do you think we see the same types of folks? Of course, it's just as big, but is there a different feel to it, or are we is this an all time sort of Alabama fan culture?
I don't think much has changed about the fan culture personally. I mean, winning obviously helps, and Saban himself and the way that he ran a program defined an era of Alabama football. But Alabama football had had tremendous success and had more success than Saban brought to it in his 17 years. I mean, he obviously compacted 6 national championships in 17 years in a way that we have never seen before in college football, which is why he's arguably the greatest coach of all time, and nobody will ever run a program like him again, potentially. But when I was growing up, which was in the 80s and 90s, Alabama football was a huge deal here in Tuscaloosa. It was a huge deal to my family, my friends, my parents' friends. I mean, Alabama football was the stuff of legend and mythology. It was there was lore already out there because of people like Bear Bryant and the golden age that he had as head coach, and even the coaches that came before him. Even so, Nick Saban came here because of that tradition. He walked into this program because he came to this program in part because he knew that he was coming to a community and to a program that was steeped in tradition and would stop at nothing to give him every resource that he needed to succeed. So Nick Saban didn't build this from scratch like many people think. Alabama was not in a great place, right, in terms of the probation that it was coming off of, the losing seasons that it was coming off of with Mike Shula and the other coaches that came before him. And so he turned something that was a negative into a major positive, but he had the Alabama brand on his side. And there are people who have been obsessed with that their entire lives before they even knew who Nick Saban was. And he gave them, and he renewed, I think, a lot of people's faith and reinvigorated it because of the volume of winning and the championship culture that he reestablished. But I think Alabama fans have essentially been the same. I mean, he created new fans and I think a new wave, and I think he, in many ways, transcended it in a lot of ways in terms of creating it or turning it into that global brand that I had mentioned, especially in the 21st century, the advent of social media, the way that ESPN and other sports media have since boomed since he became coach at Alabama. But I do think that the one constant is Alabama football and the generations of people who have been obsessed with it and treated it like a religion for most of their lives. So Alabama fans are going to Alabama fan, and they're always going to do that before Nick Saban, while he was here, and after. They're like, it's just gonna, it is what it is. They're always going to scream roll tide. So we're used to it.
Very well said. And I may have sounded like I shortchanged Auburn a while ago. Auburn and a lot of other schools, it is absolutely the same way. I was speaking to the reputation, of course, but our New Jersey audience, and by the way, we slay up there. So speaking to them, you're not going to understand this, but listen in.
Hey man, I was in New York City. Listen, I had family in New York City. I would go and visit them, and we would be walking, the streets of New York, and you'd pass by, one sports bar after another. It was a Saturday, and I poked in there and I said, "What's going on in there?" And my brother says, "Oh, that's the Rutgers bar. That's the Rutgers watch party happening right there." And I looked inside, and there were probably like 4 people in there checking their phones, and maybe there was a Rutgers game on that day. Who even knows? But up the street, you go to the Ainsworth in Manhattan, and you got this place rented out by hundreds of Alabama fans in the middle of New York City, screaming and hooting and hollering and just living it up. And you'll find that in all corners of the world, not just in New York, not just in Tuscaloosa. Everywhere you go, you will see these watch parties dedicated to watching, following, loving Alabama football. So it is different. I mean, you have these college, in no disrespect to Rutgers, they have their fan base, and I'm sure they have
Right.
plenty of obsessives out there, and everybody has their type of tradition and fandom. But I think it's not controversial to say that it's a little different in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah, I think it is a little different. Well, yeah, if any of you don't understand, listen to Ben's podcast, and you will. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, episodes will drop for Beat Everyone, podcast about Alabama football and everything that surrounds it. Ben, you've been great as always. I really appreciate you stopping by and talking to us about it.
Thank you, Ike. Next podcast is going to be what happened to our Braves this year, because I don't know. I don't know the answer. I don't know what's going on. Snake bit. That's going to be that's the podcast name. Snake bit. The Atlanta Braves in 2024.
I think we're going to be talking about yet another late season Braves comeback is what I think we're going to be talking about.
All right.
Yeah, Ozzie Albies.
There you go.
Ozzie Albies is on the DL, so you can't stay that unhealthy and win too many ball games.
Sure you lost Ozzie Albies. Sure you lost Strider, and sure you lost Ronald Acuna and now Max Fried, but everything's going to be okay. Everything's going to be just fine. Don't worry about it. Stick with them. I'm sticking with them, Mike. I don't know about you.
The great thing about baseball, and it's my sport, is that, you can take it day by day. It's, you don't get too high or too low. Just watch the ball games. Well, thanks, Ben. Thanks again. And we'll have you back on and talk about it. Talk about some more stuff. Your job involves so many things that we'll have plenty to go over.
Appreciate it, Ike. Love the show.
All right. Thanks, man. And thanks everybody out there for listening. We're going to be back here again tomorrow. Until then, as always, y'all come by anytime you want to and see what we're doing on the World Wide Web at al.com.